Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we hold sacred conversations about the things that matter. And this morning we are glad to have with us our very own Rob Radtke. We were just talking before the forum, and he and his wife Mary Abraham have been members of the St. Bart's community for 32 years now. Not only is he a stalwart parishioner within our community, but he also leads efforts in the wider Episcopal Church to combat some of the most critical needs of our time as president and CEO of Episcopal Relief and Development. This morning he's going to be talking to us about his recent sabbatical, which he took in Spain, walked the famous Camino de Santiago, and he's going to talk to us about the importance of getting away, pilgrimage, and getting a different perspective on things. So Rob, thank you. I think you also have the distinction of being, during my time, my 4 years here, you've been the most frequent forum guest.
Is that so? Do I get a special cup of coffee for that?
Some sort of award or pin I should give you.
Well, I'll look forward to that.
It's really great to have you back at the forum, and we're looking forward to hearing from you this morning.
Well, just on that topic, it's been lovely to be able to be at the forum. Normally my job would have required that I travel a tremendous amount, but because of the unfortunate events the last several years, it's meant that I've actually been able to be in my pew and to be here at St. Bart's, which is my home faith community and means a great deal to all of me. So it's lovely to see so many friends and familiar faces here this morning. I'm going to just do a little bit of an overview of the Camino, what it is and what I did. And then what I'm really most interested in is answering people's questions or seeing what's on people's minds. The Camino de Santiago, Camino means the path, takes you to Santiago de Compostela. And Santiago de Compostela is in Spain. It's translated as the Way of St. James. Santiago de Compostela is one of the three major pilgrimage destinations for Christians, the other two being Jerusalem and Rome. Christian pilgrimages descend directly from the Jewish tradition of pilgrimage, which of course started when Moses led the Jews out of Sinai to the Promised Land. Jesus himself was a bit of a pilgrim. He was an itinerant preacher through the Holy Land and through Galilee, making his way to Jerusalem and ultimately, of course, his execution at the hands of the Roman Empire. Thanks to Constantine's mother, pilgrimage has become, Constantine's mother Helena, the idea of pilgrimage to the Holy Land and to visit holy sites associated with Jesus' life and death were very much popularized and continue today. I'm going to be leading a pilgrimage on behalf of Episcopal Relief and Development to the Holy Land in just a few weeks. Pilgrimage has also become big business, and that's also, of course, true for the Camino de Santiago. I took the inspiration for my pilgrimage from this wonderful verse from a Epiphany hymn. This Epiphany hymn is not in the hymnal 1982 of the Episcopal Church. I found it this summer when I was in Canada in the Canadian Anglican Church hymnal. But I thought it was a really fitting way to kind of frame my thinking for my pilgrimage. And it references, of course, the three magi, the three kings who make their pilgrimage to visit Jesus. Pilgrims they were from unknown countries, searching for one who know the world. Lost are their names and strange their journeys. Famed is their zeal to find the child. Jesus in you the lost are claimed. Aliens are found and known and named. And I found that very much to be the case as I was walking over the course of the 38 days on this pilgrimage. There are in fact many, many Caminos de Santiago. This is just a map of some of the various paths you can take from throughout Europe to Santiago de Compostela. You can start in Rome, you can start in Siena, you can start in Lisbon, you can come from England, you can start anywhere in Germany. And these are all traditional pilgrimage paths that pilgrims have been taking to Santiago. The most common pathway that people follow is what's known as the Camino Frances, or the French Camino, and this is in fact the Camino that I followed. It's approximately 500 miles from the place where you start, which is Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and then you walk along, and it's 500 miles down there to the end, to the Camino, to the Santiago de Compostela. There's lots of infrastructure along the way as you go along on these pilgrimages. There are many albergues, which is where pilgrims stay. There are dormitories that people can show up in. They're sort of kind of like youth hostels. You show up and you can check in and get a hot bowl of soup and a good meal and a bed, and if you're lucky, a shower. Or you can do what I did, which is stay in hotels along the way with very comfortable accommodations. Not fancy, but perfectly pleasant and comfortable places to stay along the way. There are restaurants and cafes and all kinds of infrastructure available to pilgrims who are along the way. Despite the pandemic and the many border closures, about 180,000 pilgrims arrived in Santiago de Compostela in the year 2021. That's more than 3 times the number that arrived during 2020, which was about 54,000, and almost half as many who arrived in 2019, which was nearly 350,000 people. So that's 350,000 people walking some portion of the Camino and arriving in Compostela. Not everybody does all 500 miles. In order to get the certificate that you've walked it, you only have to walk the last 100 kilometers. But that's still a lot of people who are walking across northern Spain. As I said, 2019 was the busiest year. You can see some of the amenities that are available to you. There are food trucks and places where you can avail yourself of the local facilities. Who was St. James, or otherwise known in Spanish as Santiago? James, along with his brother John, was one of Jesus' 12 original disciples, and I've been following along on The Chosen, which is a course that, which is a television program that Peter is running on Thursday evenings about a mini-series. And it's been fascinating to watch James and John and their characters develop, particularly in the second season of the show. After Jesus' death, James got on the wrong side of King Herod and was one of the earliest of Jesus' followers to be martyred. He was beheaded, and tradition holds that his body that his body was taken by his followers to Spain, and that his head is buried under the Armenian Orthodox Church in the old city of Jerusalem, St. James, the Cathedral of St. James. Prior to his martyrdom, tradition also believes that he traveled from the Holy Land to Spain to evangelize. It's a bit murky as to what exactly happened next, but he must have returned to Jerusalem following his time in Spain and the rest of his, where he was martyred. His head was buried there, and then his followers, James's followers, then took the rest of his body back to Spain, where it is buried, or believed to be buried, under the altar at the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. There's a rival tradition that has his body actually buried at a cathedral in Toulouse, France. The historical record supporting any of this is, of course, very spotty. It's more a matter of faith, I think, than history in many cases. Pilgrims have been following the Camino de Santiago since at least the 9th century, making their way from throughout Europe and beyond to the cathedral in Santiago. Not surprisingly, many of the pilgrim routes follow earlier Roman routes. The entire area of Spain and that part of Spain is covered with ancient Roman roads, and many pieces of the actual Camino follow Roman roads. Some people doubt no doubt sincerely believe that they are making their way to St. James, to his final resting place. Many others, myself included, take the view that the spiritual and physical discipline of walking the Camino is really much more important than the destination. One is following in the footsteps of literally millions of people from at least 1,000 years, and that alone gives it a kind of spiritual power. In my experience, I felt that the Camino was one of those thin places, the place where the barrier between the divine and the secular was particularly thin, and that comes from the tradition of many people over many centuries walking this very sacred route. What is the significance of the scallop shell? The scallop shell is something that many people put on their laced to their boots. They wear a pendant often with a scallop shell. I'm wearing a necktie this morning with a scallop shell on it. Or they put a scallop shell on their knapsack, as I did. The scallop shell is also used to mark the route. Literally everywhere you go along the way, you're going from one signpost like this to the next, which is a stylized version of the scallop shell. The association of St. James with the scallop shell comes from the belief that as his body was being moved back to Jerusalem across the Mediterranean Ocean, that the ship encountered a terrible storm and the body was lost overboard, but that miraculously scallops attached themselves to the body and brought it to the shore, which kind of gives new meaning to Coquille Saint-Jacques. I don't think I'll ever be able to quite enjoy that meal as I have in the past. So what was the purpose of my trip? As Peter said, I was on sabbatical. My board at Episcopal Relief and Development very generously granted me a sabbatical. And I had several objectives for this sabbatical. Like many of you, my work is very much in my head. And I wanted to do something with my body. I wanted to take on the physical challenge of walking the 500 miles. I'm no athlete. I was always one of these kids that was the last chosen for the soccer team. I prayed to God I would be placed in the outfield during softball so that I could read my book. So I also felt that I wasn't getting any younger, and that if I was ever going to take on a physical challenge like this, it would be better to do it sooner rather than later. I also wanted to raise money for Episcopal Relief and Development. And thanks to many of you sitting in this room, we together raised over $150,000 for Episcopal Relief and Development's work with children under the age of 5 in our integrated early childhood program, Moments That Matter. I also wanted to share the experience, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing this forum. I wrote many blogs. I had a website where I posted things, and thanks to my daughter, I had a very active social media presence throughout this. I posted on a variety of social media channels, and to my amazement, literally thousands of people at one point or another over the course of the time that I was walking checked in, and that was just deeply moving to me. I had no expectation that anybody other than my most loyal family and friends would actually pay any attention to it. But it was really a wonderful experience to be able to share on a daily basis what I was seeing and what I was experiencing as I walked along. And I would post, my mileage every day, and people would cheer me on as I walked along. I also walked with a friend, and this was a very important part of the trip for me. This is John Dean, who is the head of the Anglican Board of Mission in Sydney, Australia. He's my counterpart for the Anglican Church in Australia, and we've been friends for 17 years. We've traveled to many corners of the earth, of the world, to do program visits, and he attends St. James Church in Sydney, Australia. So when I, in the height of the pandemic, proposed to him that this would be a good idea, he agreed immediately, I think somewhat to his amazement, once he finally got there and figured out what it was all about. But the two of us had a great time as we went along the way. This is on the morning of the day we've completed the walk, which is probably why we look so happy. What was it like? We took 38 days to walk the route from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port all the way to Santiago de Compostela. There are, kind of three major regions. Let me just back up. There are three major sections of the walk. The first section is from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Burgos, which is one of the big cathedral towns, and then from Burgos all the way to Leon, which is just there, and then finally to Santiago. And they divide into approximately 10 to 12 day chunks of the walk. You walk through three major sections of Spain, the Basque Country and Navarra, and then just through a little bit of La Rioja, and you have wonderful wine along the way, drinking wonderful Spanish wines. You then pass through Castilla and Leon, and then finally you end up in Galicia, which is the final province of Spain that you end up walking across. Throughout the walk, you you collect stamps along the way. You get a credential in the first town that you start. In my case, it was Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and you go to the pilgrim office, and they stamp it, and then you're off to the races. And you collect these stamps along the way, and it's the way you can prove that you've actually walked. You're required to get 2 stamps per day. We ended up getting many more because the stamps were very beautiful. You would get them at your hotel. You could get them at any church that you would visit, often at the little cafes or shops along the way. I filled up 3 books of stamps. And then, as you're walking along, all 3 regions of Spain are very, very different. These are some photographs from the middle section, which is about 2 weeks in the middle of the trip. It's walking across the Meseta Central of the high plains of Spain. It's kind of like walking across Kansas. It's as far as the eye can see. It's flat for days and days and days. And about, 8 days in, I said, I'm done with the flat. And somebody texted me and said, just wait. You'll be looking back on those days of flat as been very important. The other thing that happened was we were there in October and early November, which tends to be the rainy season in Spain. And I don't know why I hadn't researched that before I chose that time of the year to go. But it gave new meaning to the term, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. But most days you were also blessed with beautiful rainbows. So it was exquisitely beautiful. The first part of the trip is climbing up from France over the Pyrenees along the Route Napoleon, which is believed to have been the route that Napoleon took when he crossed the Pyrenees. And then the last third, you actually climb to the highest point on the entire Camino, which is about 5,000 feet up, and it's called the Iron Cross. It was the hardest day. You come to the cross early in the day, and then as I discovered, and people who do a lot of hiking would have known this before going on the trip, but I didn't, it's the going down part that's the hard part. And so then you climb down literally 22 miles down off of the highest peak on that day. That was the toughest day of the entire trip. You walk through beautiful vineyards. It was autumn and the colors were exquisite as you walk along the way. There are lovely forested pathways down which you can walk. You visit beautiful towns with lovely and spectacular cathedrals, charming villages with lovely ancient buildings and bridges. And then, of course, you're also walking in industrial zones because not everything is beautiful. This is on the approach to Burgos. The last, sort of 7 miles is through highways and past their equivalent of the Home Depot and other places like that. And there's a walkway here, a bridge that takes you over railway tracks. But you're also rewarded with beautiful flora along the way. I was really surprised this time of the year to see so many wonderful flowers as I was walking. The pilgrims themselves create art that they leave for other pilgrims to find as they're walking along. The far left-hand side is a sculpture that's made out of empty beer bottles that pilgrims have painted their names on the bottle of and put into a sculpture. This is a statue, a pilgrim statue of, I think it's meant to be Santiago or St. James. And then these are stars that some pilgrims had hung from a tree on a branch just before the entrance to Santiago de Compostela. And of course, there's also beautiful fine arts, paintings and illuminated manuscripts that you can visit. There's a lovely library with exquisite pieces of art, and we tried to make time in every town to do that. Mostly we walked about, as I said, 10 to 15 miles a day, and starting at 8 o'clock in the morning, we would normally reach our destination about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, which was the height of the siesta in Spain, and we would, of course, avail ourselves of that time to siesta, and then things would reopen in the evenings at around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and you'd go out and you could visit the cathedrals and museums and then have dinner and go to bed. Of course, you met wonderful people along the way, many other pilgrims. This is the pilgrim up there on the far left is a young man who was taking a picture of himself with every pilgrim he met along the way. And I sort of thought that was a bit odd. And he said that he was going to put them together into a film that was going to be what he was describing the film as the face of God. And I thought that was a really lovely idea, to take a collage of the literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people that he was putting together. The woman here on the other side is a nun who ran a little hermit. She was a hermit nun, and she ran this little hermitage, and she would bring you, and you could come in, and she would give you a blessing and a little medal to wear around. This is an older gentleman who was not carrying his own gear. He was pulling it behind him. And then, of course, we were there at Halloween, and there were lovely children also getting ready for Halloween. Again, just some pictures of some of the people. You wish people what's known as a good Camino or a buen Camino along the way, and that's kind of your common greeting, because many people speak many different languages. And so as people pass people or people pass you, you say buen Camino to them as you're going along. And after 500 miles, you finally arrive in Santiago de Compostela. That's the cathedral there in Santiago. This is a sign at the entrance to the village. You make your way to the main cathedral to get the final stamp on your credentials. Before you can take it and get the certificate, you have to have the final stamp put in at the cathedral itself. And there's often a pilgrim mass. In fact, there are several pilgrim masses in many different languages at the cathedral, where they swing this huge incenser. I don't know that the photograph really conveys the size of it, but it's at least this big, and it's known as the botufumerio. And they only swing it at certain times of the year. It wasn't in use at the time that John and I visited the cathedral, but it's really quite remarkable. And then you take all of your stamps down to the pilgrim office. As I said, I filled 3 books full of stamps. And then you get a certificate, which is known as the Compostela, which is suitable for framing. And you take it home and you put it on your wall. And then you're done, and you relax over a beer, and you soak your feet, and you think about all of the wonderful experience that you had. And for me, it was an exhilarating, it was both exhausting and exhilarating experience. And I feel really lucky to have done it, and I'm very grateful, as I said, for all of the support that I've gotten from so many people, both here in the room at St. Bart's, and I know many people who are watching online. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob, for making us a part of your experience from the beginning and recounting it so wonderfully for us. If you have questions or comments for Rob and you're here in the building, Diana Sarbu in the back corner has some question cards she'll pass around. And if you could fill that out and return that to her, she'll bring them up to me. If you're joining us online, you can put your question into the live chat on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org, pthompson at stbarts.org. And if you're in the room and it's easier to just type on your phone, feel free to do that too. We already have some questions that have come in. Someone has asked if you can talk about the physical and or spiritual challenges along the way.
Sure. I knew I was going to do this for some time in advance, and I was quite intentional about doing training for it. Which I think was really an important thing to have done. So I did not find, I was, my body was in shock for the first 4 days or so, because it had never been, it's one thing to walk 15 miles in a day, but then to get up and do it for several days in a row, never mind 38 days in a row, is a shock. But you find, or I found, that you get into a rhythm. And, there were days, we took a couple of rest days, and days that I didn't rest, or days when I was resting, my body was sort of like jittery. It was like, it's time to go. What are you doing sitting around, lard ass? Get moving. So for me, I had all of the normal things that you would have expected. I had blisters on my feet, and I, didn't have the right kinds of socks always. And so you have to do a little bit of experimenting, because you don't know exactly how your body's going to respond to everything along the way. From a spiritual point of view, I made a point while I was walking of reading the daily morning prayer every morning before I got up, even out of bed. I had a little app from Forward Movement that sent me, the proper readings and psalms and whatnot, and that was very centering for me. I use that. I don't normally have the custom of doing that on a day-to-day basis, and I found that brought me to a place of calm in the mornings, because there were some mornings when you just really you don't want to get out of bed, and I'd made the commitment to do it, and I got up and I did it, and that was an important part of being able to do that.
What were you expecting when you decided to go on this pilgrimage, and how did the experience match or differ from your expectations?
That's a great question. I was sitting at Kennedy Airport having lunch with my wife just before getting on the flight, and she said, "So why is it exactly you're doing this?" And I said, "I have no idea." I had thought it would be a solitary experience, notwithstanding the fact that I had a companion that I was going with, a friend. But we're the kinds of friends that don't have to talk constantly to each other. We can be quiet with each other for hours on end. So I knew John would be a really good companion. But I figured it would be a much more of a sort of as I said, a solitary experience. And in fact, it was a communal experience, which was a big surprise to me. And no reason it should have been a surprise if I'd thought about it, but there was a group of us who all started more or less at the same time. Completely random group of people who picked October 10th as the day that they were going to start walking the Camino de Santiago from all over the world, and we more or less walked as a group, as a pack. Some of us the entire way, some people left early, some people joined later, and not everybody walked the same amount every day. So, you might walk in a little cohort of 4 or 5 people for 2 or 3 days, and then you'd pull ahead of them, or they'd pull ahead of you, and so it was a little bit in and out, and that was a really wonderful part of it, the kind of the serendipity of meeting people who were on their own journeys and learning about their own reasons for coming on the Camino. So yeah, that was a big surprise for me. It's not something that I had expected. I had anticipated it being much more of a solitary kind of enterprise, and really it was a much more of a social experience than I had anticipated.
Someone uses the adjective life-changing. Were you expecting a life-changing experience, and was it life-changing?
So a lot of people that I talked to before I went out on the Camino said, "Oh, it's going to be a life-changing experience." And I was like, I don't know. I don't think I want to change my life. I kind of like my life. And I don't mean that in a flip way. I'm an extremely fortunate person in life. I was born on third base. I didn't earn a lot of what I have in life. But I like it, and I wasn't going because I was coming out of some great professional trauma or personal trauma. And there are a lot of people who are going on a Camino, and you meet them who have just ended marriages or have had a spouse that's passed away, and they're using it as a way to process their grief. And that certainly was not my experience. So I was not anticipating a life-changing event. Having said that, it changed me. And I don't know whether that's about changing my life or whether that's about me, but you have a lot of time to think and to sort of complete an entire thought cycle around something that you've been thinking about maybe for 4 or 5 years, but haven't really had the kind of the moment and the clarity to kind of focus on.
I said at the beginning that you work on kind of the most pressing needs facing our world at a pretty high level. Why would you and your board decide that taking time off from those fights is important?
Well, you'd have to ask my board that question. But for me, coming out of the pandemic, some of the statistics about what happened to global poverty are really, really awful. There are some estimates that global poverty, the gains that we made in the last 30 years were wiped out. That's my entire career. Everything that I had done on global poverty had potentially been wiped out. And that was a really difficult moment. And I needed to get away from that, process that grief. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that was kind of what I was there to do, unintentionally. It's just occurring to me now. And to recharge and to gain new strength. I mean, it's sort of counterintuitive to do something that exhausts you in order to give you new strength. But that's very much what my experience was. So, I don't know that that was a conscious goal on my part, but it may very well have been an unintended, certainly was an unintended benefit of it, and whether that was a sort of an unconscious goal, I don't know. The board, as I said, you'd have to ask them, but they were cognizant of the fact that I had been in my role by then for over 16 years. I love my job. I don't have any intention of leaving it. At the same time, I also needed a time away, as I think everybody does when you have these difficult, challenging roles.
Yeah, what would you say to others about the value of either sabbatical or pilgrimage or both?
Well, if you're lucky enough to be able to do it, absolutely. For me, it's been critical. I haven't done it recently, but prior to the pandemic, I would often go away on silent retreats for 4 or 5 days at a time. And again, it's a way of kind of clearing out the background noise. And we live with a lot of background noise in our lives. And in that sense, I think pilgrimage can really do that. It certainly can do it for me, and it can do it for others. When I've taken people on I lead pilgrimages, often to Episcopal Relief and Development program sites, and many times people will tell me that, particularly when we go to the Holy Land, that they come with a burden on their heart, and they find it as a place where they can lay down some of those burdens. And a good pilgrimage can do that for you.
Along those lines, one questioner mentions a book by Arthur C. Brooks. I'm not familiar with it, but you might be, called Strength to Strength. And this person says that in it he talks about the value of pilgrimage and the discernment pilgrimage can help you with. And the follow-up question for you is, did you have any epiphanies along the way? Was there any discernment that you were able to do?
I'm not familiar with the book. I'll have to go find it. I probably, and I think for me, it's been the time after the pilgrimage where the epiphanies have occurred, interestingly enough. I had some resolutions that I made while I was on the pilgrimage. One, I want to be more intentional about my own personal faith formation. I think a lot of us carry around a lot of shame in our lives, a lot of baggage, and I want to stop doing that as much as I can. I tend to be a person who, gets frustrated at, burden, or frustrated at roadblocks. If something's not working, I can just hammer at it. And sometimes it is what it is. You can't move things out of the way. Sometimes you just have to walk around them. I'm also someone who, I know my own mind, and I have a very clear idea. I have high executive capacity, but I think, and I tend to, I think I have the bad habit, the bad practice of sometimes expecting other people to do things the way I do them and the way I think they need to be done. And the reality is that everybody, and this was a revelation of the Camino, everybody has to walk the path their own way. I had a very fixed ideas that you needed to use this equipment and use these poles and walk in this way, and if you didn't do it, it was going to be a disaster. Well, that might work for me, but it wasn't necessarily going to work for everybody else. And sort of coming to terms with the fact that my role was not to tell people how to walk their life or their Camino. My role is to help people walk it for themselves and to support them in the way that they want to do things. So I think those were some of the epiphanies that I had.
So you made some resolutions on the pilgrimage itself for how you would live when you came back.
Right.
Did you, was that a goal you had going into the pilgrimage, that you wanted to come up with resolutions? How did you decide to come up with them, and how are they going so far?
Well, some of the resolutions that I just mentioned, some of the things I've just talked about are some of those resolutions. And the answer is no. I did not go into the pilgrimage thinking I was going to come out with a list of resolutions. But as the pilgrimage unfolded, and I spent 38 days in my own mind thinking through things. As I said, things emerged. And I'm also was cognizant of the fact that I'm on the cusp of being 60. So I figure I've probably, if I'm lucky, got 30 more active years, if I'm really lucky and stay healthy. And what do I want to do with those 30 years? How do I want to live those 30 years? So I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I did go into the pilgrimage with that kind of intellectual agenda. What came out was not what, I didn't go out thinking I'm going to come out with 5 resolutions and whatnot. I don't know how I'm doing. I mean, we're all works in progress. And I think some days I do better at it than other days.
Well, and there is always that moment when you come down off of the mountaintop, you have
Right.
the spiritual experience, and then how does it translate to real life or not?
Yeah, and then the laundry needs to get done, know. So, bills need to be paid. And I will say that I was careful when I came back. I came back right before Thanksgiving. I did not go immediately back to work. I took 2 weeks, partially because it was the Thanksgiving holidays and I needed to reintegrate with my family and things like that. But I still feel the zzz of the pilgrimage. I mean, I still feel the exhilaration of it. I came off of it. People talk about endorphin highs. Athletes talk about that, and I don't know whether that's what I had or not, but I still can tap into that feeling of elation that was extremely powerful at the end and has continued even after that. What am I now, 8 weeks away from having returned?
What was reentry like? Was it easy to get back into work or difficult? Did you find yourself daydreaming about being back in Spain?
No, I was ready to come back. It's the sign, I think, of a good time away, is you are ready to come back. I was very glad I had a transition, that I didn't, get off the airplane and go straight to the office. I am blessed that I have a wonderful team at my organization, so it ran smoothly while I was away. I didn't have to come back to solve some terrible problem or drama that had happened while I was away. So the transition back, and it was fine. I'm glad to be back. I'm excited about where the organization's going to go in the next 5 to 7 years. I want to go back and do another Camino. I'm talking with John about the possibility of doing what's known as the Portuguese Camino at some point, not immediately, but the next couple of years, where you walk from Lisbon up the coast of Portugal to to Santiago. The reentry, I was ready to come back. And so I've been glad to be back, and yet I'll look forward to doing another one.
Your daughter is watching online.
Uh-oh. This will be the zinger, won't it?
She wants to know how keeping a travel log through social media and your blog helped shift your experience.
That's a great question. That was a very important part of shifting the experience, actually, because every day I had to sit down and think about what are in 3 sentences, what was today? And in 7 pictures out of the hundreds I might have taken on any given day, tell the story in the best way. So it provided a moment every day where I paused and I thought, what do I want to share and how do I want to share it? And how can I make what's personal experience an experience that can be appreciated in some way at least by other people. And that's not something that I don't keep a diary on a regular basis. I just go through my day and don't stop at the end of every day and reflect on it. Although Mary gave me a book this year for Christmas that's what's known as a 5-year diary, where you write like 3 sentences each day and then your years follow one after another so you can look back on it. And I have been doing that in much the same way that I did the daily posts. I'm not so vain as to think that people actually care what my daily life is like when I'm not walking the Camino. But that's a really important new thing that I have taken on, practice that I've taken on as a result of the pilgrimage.
Someone asks about Chaucer, and I'm glad I'm not the only person that thought about Canterbury Tales.
Right.
His pilgrims told stories along the way. I'm wondering, this person is wondering, what storytelling happened while you were on the Camino, and can you share anything
Yeah,
about that?
sure. That's a great question. In fact, I wrote it's called my Chaucer, I call it my Chaucer blog, about the people you meet along the Camino. And, there is a bit of a omerta about it. What happens on the Camino stays on the Camino. But having said that, there were definitely, people share a great deal as you get to know them. And I think there's I was sitting one evening in one of the albergues doing my laundry, waiting for the laundry to dry, and there was this young man who was waiting to do his laundry as well or something. And I was just looking at the guidebook trying to figure out what was going to happen the next day, and it was clear he wanted to talk. And so I finally put my guidebook aside and I said to him, "What are you doing here on the Camino?" And he was not atypical. There were a lot of young people in their 20s and early 30s who were searching, who were looking for a new way of life. And for whatever reason, they may not have been particularly, they may not have been particularly religious people, although he was, but they were clearly looking for a new path. They were burned out from jobs as lawyers or teachers or whatever it was, and trying to discern, they were really there to discern a life-changing experience. There were lots of wonderful people like that. I called them they were the archetype that I called was the lost lawyers. And they were just, for me, who was well into my career, it was sad to see so many young people who, on the one hand, it was very sad that they were unhappy, but it was also good to see them pausing to say, this is not the right and sustainable path for me as a person. And a lot of these were clearly young people who had been on that escalator. They'd started at preschool, and the escalator just takes them to the next floor, and then they get on the next escalator, and eventually they're saying, this escalator is not the ride I want to make out of my life. Coming back to sort of helping other people walk their Caminos in the way they want to walk, he wanted somebody to listen to him, to hear his story, and to, he himself was a very devout Catholic, gay, and struggling with being a devout Catholic and the gay, being gay in the Catholic Church, and wanting to find a place for himself in that community. I did not pitch the Episcopal Church to him. I was very good about it. But I just said, you need to ask yourself some questions. And so I said, these are the sort of questions I'd be asking myself if I were in your position.
It seems, it could be just the particular bubble I find myself in, but it seems the Camino has become more and more popular. Do you see that from your perspective? And if so, why do you think that is?
It has become very popular, and I blame Shirley MacLaine. She wrote a book about walking the Camino, and there's been a film by Martin Sheen called The Way, which is actually a very good film. And if you ever want to get a sense of what it's like to walk the Camino, I would recommend that film. So that's popularized it in people's imagination, particularly here in North America, amongst English-speaking people. In Europe, it's been popular for some time. And what I found in Europe was there were lots of people who, like, every summer will walk 10 days or 2 weeks. They'll go back home and come back the next summer and walk it in chunks. I think that, it's entered into popular culture, which has made it much more visible to people. I think, there are a cohort of people, and to be able to walk the Camino, you have to be fairly privileged anyway. You have to have the financial resources to take the time away and to actually walk the Camino, although you can do it inexpensively if you want to. I think people are searching, and the Camino is a good place to do that.
Someone wonders how you chose the places where you stayed each night. Is there kind of like a list of hotels and hostels that one would stop at?
So I took the easy way out. I hired a company. that I said, I want to go between this day and this day. Can you please organize it for me? So we had a logistics company that selected the towns where we were going to stay based on where they thought it would be sensible to stay. And for the most part, it was fine. I think I would do things slightly differently if I were choosing. There were a lot of people who would get up in the morning and say, well, I think today I want to walk 10 miles. So what's 10 miles out? They'd find the town, they go on hotels.com and book a hotel that way. So you can do it any way you wanted. I needed I needed a plan. I'm a planner, so I had somebody make a plan. I also we didn't carry our own backpacks. A lot of people will carry their own gear. It was a pilgrimage, not a death march. We organized our bags to be moved from town to town, which meant that we did have to be on a fixed itinerary in order for that to happen.
A final question before we end. We've mentioned a few times that not everyone has the privilege to be able to take so much time off and do this. For those who can't do something like the Camino, what are your thoughts on how they can work in some form of pilgrimage or Sabbath into their lives?
Well, that's a wonderful question, because a pilgrimage does not have to be 40 days across northern Spain. I think you can find and build boundaries around your day or your week in all sorts of different ways. I'm going to embarrass her, but Mary Hart and I did pilgrimages every Saturday during the pandemic. We would walk for 3 or 4 hours every Saturday around Central Park. And we didn't go into it thinking it was a pilgrimage, but in many ways it was. It was a time to be quiet or to chat or to enjoy nature. It became a really, really, for me, important way of dealing with the pandemic. So I think, you can take a pilgrimage around Central Park. I mean, it doesn't have to be to Spain. And I think it's about the intentionality of it. I think that's really important. Sabbath and pilgrimage is about being intentional, and it can be you can be intentional for a 5-minute Sabbath, and you can be intentional for a 20-minute walk, and those can be pilgrimages or Sabbaths.
Okay, final question. You're now back at work. There's a lot going on in the world. What should we know about what's going on at Episcopal Relief and Development these days?
Boy, Episcopal Relief and Development has just started a new phase in its strategic planning. We've just launched, which is one of the reasons I did my sabbatical when I did it. We've just launched a new plan. We're grappling with just tremendous human suffering as a result of the war in Ukraine. It may not be quite in the headlines the way it was a year ago, but it is every bit as awful and getting worse. It's having a knock-on effect on, Ukraine was the breadbasket for most of a good part of the developing world, so it's having a knock-on effect with starvation throughout the developing world. So, we're working with many, many others to do the best we can to alleviate that crisis, while at the same time, focusing, as we always have, on integrated early childhood development, reducing gender-based violence, addressing the impact of a changing climate. I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude. 2022 was people were extremely generous to Episcopal Relief and Development in 2022, and that was not foregone when we started the year, given all of the uncertainty. So we're in a very strong position to have a deep and lasting impact, so I'm very grateful for that.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for all the work that you do, and thank you for sharing your experience with us this morning.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you everybody at St. Bart's and everybody watching online.
And thank you all for being here. We hope, whether you're joining us in person or online, that you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m. Next week at the Forum, we'll be welcoming John Collins, Professor Emeritus at Yale University. He'll be talking about his book, What Are Biblical Values? What the Bible actually says about key ethical issues of our time. So hope you'll join us for that.